Hi, today we're going to take a look at making some changes to the floor plan of your restaurant. And by your floor plan, I'm talking about when your waitstaff logs in, the first thing that they see. When your restaurant is using a floor plan, it enables your staff to go ahead and access tables just by pressing visual shortcuts. It's great for your staff being able to be on the same page with regards to table numbers, seeing which tables are actually occupied. You can indicate which checks are printed and when the tables are getting ready to leave. So there's a lot of advantages to using it and keeping it up to date. What we're going to do here is sign into Aloha Manager, and this is in the back of the house. If you do not have access to the back of the house, or you signed out, forgot your password, or if you don't have access to this specific function, reach out to us here at the office so that we can help you and make sure that it's something you should have access to. And what we're going to do is we're going to go up here under Maintenance and Screen Designer. So for table service, we're going to have table service screen designer. For quick service, we're going to have quick service screen designer. Either way, the functions should still be the same. There's just a little bit of difference on how it works for quick service. Quick service uses a little bit more with regards to panels, so you'll have some differences in there. The functions will still be the same for switching buttons, but instead of you actually having tables in quick service, you will be using buttons to represent individual items. So we're actually going to be focusing on table service today, though. If you need to make changes in quick service and you'd like to reach out to us, please do, and we'll actually cover a little bit of how to maintain quick service in a different webinar covering specifically those edits. So what we're going to do here is we're going to choose the screen designer resolution. We're going to pick the resolution that we want to work with so that we are seeing the screen exactly as it will appear in the front of the house for the staff. So what we want to do is we're going to go ahead and set it to 1024-768, which is the resolution of most of the front of the house terminals. And that will let us see it exactly in the right proportion, so we can make sure things aren't overlapping or we're going to be causing any issues or there's gaps where we don't expect. And symmetry. And if you happen to be detail focused, that will serve you well in here, only because things will still behave and work properly a lot of the times with regards to tables if they are, say, out of alignment, but you will visually be able to tell that they are out of alignment in the front of the house. So it helps just to have an eye for detail, just so you don't fixate trying to see what it is that's wrong without being able to identify it. What we're going to do then is it's going to bring us up here, this table service screen designer panel editor. And we could do screen editor, the other choice that we had up there, and we could switch to that here. The screen editor allows us to actually move the individual panels around. So you can see here under the screen editor, I've brought up, this is the screen that we're going to be working with. So I have my main area here in this panel. Then I have a separate panel up here with a different background that has these three buttons that allow us to change areas. We call those pods. And then we have a separate panel down the side with these buttons listed into it. And usually you're only going to use the screen editor to actually completely switch these out. So most of the time this is going to be not going to be changed. This is done during the configuration of your system when we do your first install. So there won't be anything for you to actually do here. So I just want you to see that it exists. We can get to it, but what we're going to be doing is actually working in the panel editor and making changes to the individual panels, moving tables, moving buttons, adding labels, and so forth. Our table service screen designer starts with this blank screen, and we have a properties box here to the right. So typically what I do to get a feel for what I'm working with is I right click, or you can go up here to open panel. And what we're looking for is show all panels for the screen that we are working on. So if we do show that, it's going to show us which screens we have. And most of the time you'll just have the one main screen that is the map that everyone is using. In quick service, sometimes you would have an additional screen for, say, a delivery driver window or counter service people. And it's going to go ahead and open up all three panels that your staff sees. So what we have here is one panel, two panels, and three panels. You can see that. And if we are clicking in the individual panel, not on an item in it, my property box up here will show me the properties for that entire panel. And you can expand this to make it a little bit longer. So this is showing me the name of the panel, the size of the panel, the dimensions, and its properties, and so forth. The important thing that we want to do when we're making changes to the panels right away is that these are usually saved by default as a template. And the template means that those are the versions that we start with when we're working, and we make copies of those as needed. So if you are looking at these could possibly be locked. If they are a template, that means you can't make any changes on them. So since we want to make changes to this one right here, we're going to go ahead over here and see all the different attributes. We're actually looking where it says marked as template. And we're going to switch that just from true to false. That's going to allow me to edit things on this panel in the first place. And then also we have a fixed button layout is turned on, and that locks the buttons so nobody accidentally moves them if you've got everything in the right position. And we're also going to go ahead and flip that over to false, and that's going to let us go ahead and make changes to this panel now. And we need to remember that we have to do that for any one that we're going to be making changes for, because these are all individual panels. So if we want to make changes to the other ones, again, we need to go ahead and make those to be false. Pretty straightforward. It's just a step that will save you some grief. What happens if you don't do this is you'll make some changes, you'll drag some things around, and then they will snap right back where they were. And it's a little bit confusing as to why they're snapping back. We don't want you to get everything lined up, perfect move, and then go to save and everything returns to its original state. Once we do that, if we wanted to, we can save these panels at any given time. And if you go up here under the panel to choose Save Panel, you have Save Panel and you have Save All Panels. I'm going to go ahead and Save All Panels. And what you can see here is if my panels are all already saved, I don't even have the option to save panels. So if you go up there to save, you're not sure and you go to find it and it's not there, that's because you're already saved, you're good, you're already ready to go on. So what we're going to do here for the most part is all going to be done with these panel buttons here. We can create buttons, we can move buttons, we can create a new table, we can create a new wall and a new image. And inserting those things is going to be very, very straightforward in the system. But what I'm going to do is show you some pitfalls, where we move some things around, some problems that you could typically run into, and where to look for the solution for those, or what the rules is for those items. So this one item right here is actually just a button. And it is set to go ahead and open up the bar. And then these are tables. So the tables are assigned to an actual table number. And before we get into looking at the table numbers and moving them, I'm going to show you where tables are defined, because that's the only thing that we actually have to drop out of the panel editor to make changes to. And if we go into maintenance and we go down here to system settings, there is an area called table definition. So the table definition in the system is where we actually tell it what are valid table numbers, and also when you do select that table and it asks you the number of guests sitting at it, what is the default number of people that's auto-filled in for that table. And the easiest way to look at this actually is not at this individual, but if you go up here to the right corner and you select this this half blue, half white button, what that does is it switches it over to the spreadsheet view, the kind of Excel spreadsheet view of it that's behind the scenes. And this is usually a little bit easier to look at and make changes. But if a table is something, a table number that we want to use doesn't exist, this is where we have to go ahead and create it. So we have here what the description of the table name is. And then there's an alternate name. So right now it's set to go ahead and use the table number as the default number. But if we wanted to say, for instance, rename them to bar 1, or maybe we have tables like H1, H2, and H3 for high tops in the bar area, we can actually go over here and change the alternate names to be H1, H2, H3. Now when you do that, they're not going to change on the screen editor back here. They're still going to display as table 13, table 14, table 15. Well, the reason for that is we still can't reuse the tables. Okay, so if we're going to be using the H numbers or something like that, they'll appear on the guest checks, they'll appear for the servers to see, and everywhere else in the front of the house after we refresh. And if we don't want to confuse things, we might want to go create a new section in here like table 700 or table 800 and go ahead and assign them to that area. We also have the revenue center, which by default is going to be your dining room, but if you want that to appear in your sales reports as a table that would say bar revenue, we could go flag all the tables in the bar as bar revenue center, and then they would also appear in the sales for that. And then interestingly enough, this is where we choose whether something is the table on the editor is going to be round or square. So we can make a change to that too if we have a different table shape in the restaurant. Looking back at our screen editor, we're going to go ahead here and start making some changes. So when we select a table, it's going to get a little ring of dots around the outside edge of it. So whichever one we're using as our point of reference, or if we only have one, it's going to have white dots. I'm going to hold down Control and select a second table, and you're going to see that that second one is the white dots now, the last one I've selected, and the previous one has black dots around it. If I hit Control and hit 3 tables, you'll notice that I have two black and one white. The white one is always the point of reference. That's the last one I've selected. And if I make any changes, like I tell it, I want them all to line up to the same point, or I want them all to be the same size as each other, it means that the black ones will change size to match the white one, or they will line up with the white one. So there's just a visual indicator of which one is our frame of reference. So if we wanted to say move these three tables, we can go ahead and just pick the table up individually and move it. We can also go ahead and hold down Control to select multiples, or we can hold down Shift and select them if they're next to each other, but it won't let you go all over the table and do it. So Control is usually your best way to select multiple tables, and if you do have multiple ones, you can go ahead and drag them together as a group. You can also use the arrows on your keyboard to move them if you just need to move them a little bit of tiny adjustments, trying to get them lined up with something specific or visual. Now you can see as soon as I did that, I immediately created a different size gap because I moved the one individually. So this one here has a little bit narrower area than this one, and I'll show you. So what happens here in order to line these up is when we have multiple tables selected, we have some options when we right select here. We can right select a table, and we have here, in addition to deleting it or removing it, we can change the sizing on it. So we could make it the same size as a different table, the same height, same width, same size all the way around, which changes both the height and the width. And we have some alignment options, and we use the alignment options quite a bit. Centering them, we'll center them in the entire panel, or we can center them horizontally in the entire panel, or vertically. What we want to do here is we're going to space evenly horizontally. So it's going to look at the three in a row horizontally, and then it's going to make sure the space between 401 and 402 is the same size as the space between 402 and 403. So if I do that, you can see now we've got them evenly spaced. It looks nice. That's usually how your restaurant is laid out as well. And also visually, it doesn't cause you to fixate on it. And additionally, now you can see that this one right here is just slightly lower. So the way that we adjust them to make them line up that way is we can select those same tables. We know that the white one with the ring around it with the white dots is going to be our frame of reference. So we're going to go hit here and align bottom, and that means it'll move the bottom of the other two to match it so they're all on the same line. And every individual one that we have selected here has its X and Y coordinates located here. So we have its location, and that's going from the top, not the bottom. So it goes over 587 dots, and then it's going to go 51 dots down, and it's going to start drawing it here, and that one's going to be 77 by 64, the size of this button. We can actually go up here and change the sizes by typing in. There is a minimum size, and that's because Aloha doesn't want you to make a table so small that you actually can't push it up front. So I think it stops us in the high 40s here. So let's try to change a size and see what we get. 48 is our minimum size, and those are pretty small. So that's going to be a limiting factor if we have, say, a very long bar that we're trying to fit on a panel and a lot of tables that are going to go around that bar. If we're using this for bar stools, at that point, we may want to choose to make it diagonal. Usually about 10 or 15 tables, 12 or 15 tables or bar stools is the max you can comfortably get around a bar when you're drawing it out. Beyond that, we might want to break it into two sections, or maybe use a different mechanism. And also, that's usually only limiting because the bar tables would be selected that way by waitstaff. Usually your bartenders are using tabs, so they're not going to this table screen either and not needing to even choose a seat. Okay. So looking at that, we can also change the table numbers when we select any object. This is the properties for that object on the right side. So what you can see here is we've chosen that this is going to be table 403. If we want to change that to a different table number, we're more than welcome to go ahead and choose a different table number for it. Again, it's only choosing the ones that were listed in the table definition. So if we need to, we would have to go back down here and create a new table definition. So if we went down here and chose our new table definition, we need to make a 511 table. We can select the one that's chosen here. We can hit copy on it, 511. We'll go ahead and hit save. And then we should have additional choices in here for it. 511 is now a table number for us. So we can add additional tables if we want to. Sometimes on a panel we'll stick a couple extra tables in there if we want to use them for employee meals, or if we're going to use them to ring in banquet items or to go things if we're not using Aloha takeout and delivery. Those will give us some flexibility to have another table that somebody can ring in visually real fast. Other things that we can do on here is make sure that we don't overlap anything. If you try to overlap two tables, even if it's just by a little pixel, and you try to save that panel, it is actually going to give you an error saying that we can't have overlapping elements, and that's because we don't want our staff to push right here and it not know whether that's supposed to be 511 or 404. So just make sure that you don't have them overlap. I'm going to reset this one back to the same size as the other ones. So I've got it selected. It's going to use the white one as a frame of reference, and I'm going to go ahead and hit sizing, make same size. So now they're back to being the same size again. This is an oval table. So those were selected because out here on the table definition, that table had been declared as round, not square. If you do change the shape of the table using that, you want to switch one from round to square, and you come back here to the panel editor, you'll notice it's still the old shape until you actually click on it, and then it redraws. So our tables also have a couple other options that we can enable for our tables. You'll notice over here that we can show how we're sitting it. We can orient to that a little bit differently. If we want to change the orientation on that, it's changing the degrees of it. So I can rotate that to make that a 45-degree table. Looks strange on rectangles, but on squares, that's how you would create the diamond if it's located tilted and you like there's an angle. We can change the size of our tables here. We can also go ahead and indicate whether we're showing chairs. If we have that turned on as a whole and we want to see them, we can put chairs to the sides of the tables out in the front of the house. We can also put a bench on that side or a booth on that side as well. Just changes the visual, it doesn't have any impact on it, so we usually don't include it because it's purely cosmetic. And the other interesting thing down here though is display a printed check. If you have this set to true for that table, once a check is actually printed for that table, you will see a little tiny image of a check paper clipped to the table in the front of the house. And that's a nice indicator for your staff because it lets them know that that table is about to leave. It's a visual cue for your managers to see that that server has all of their tables are getting ready to leave. Maybe that's the server you want to cut and send home for the evening. For your host staff or your bussers, maybe that's an indicator that they should get ready to clean that table because they need it to seat the next people, so they know where to direct their efforts towards. And for your staff, it's just a reminder that, hey, I need to go over and pick up the payment for that, or I can focus on other things because those people are already taken care of and ready to leave now. So we've got that information there that we can turn on for them. The other objects that we have in here inserted between our walls, you can see we've separated this off to make a separate room. So the walls are here, and you'll notice that it's still a big square button even though we're only actually seeing one side of that square. So when we do a wall, if we create a new image or a new wall, it generates that new wall with the wall being on the top of that square. We can still redraw it, change the size, move it around by selecting the little corners, but when we do, it always stays on that top. But in our properties over here, you can see that we are drawing a horizontal line. So anytime it's a horizontal line, it will be on the top. Anytime I make it a vertical line, it will always be on the left side of that square. We can also choose additional ones if we want to do diagonals, which angle it's going. We can do arches on it so that we could do the end of a bar. And by combining the arches and the lines, we can go ahead and create shapes to represent bars, curved walls, and other areas within the restaurant. And you can change the shapes of these, move them around. It gives you a lot of flexibility with what we're doing for drawing the imagery on it. Right click, I'm just going to go ahead and delete that, and I'm actually going to move this kind of back up into the area we were at up here. And so you just line it up to where you want those walls to be, and then you've got a closed area. If you wanted to make sure that you designated where the door was on there, then we'll just go ahead and grab right here in the middle, and it's going to let me change the length of that, and now you can see where the entrance to that room is. We can also go ahead and insert on here just buttons. So we can set in here that we want a new button, And that button could be something that goes ahead and performs a function like opening a new area. That's what these are up here. This is a bar that opens the panel to the bar. The button can also go ahead and start a function like changing the view over here. It can exit you from the screen. And where we define that for the button is down here. There's a section called function. So function lets us choose what the action is going to do when we press that button. And that's a list, that's a pull down. So there's quite a few different functions you can insert in there. Most commonly it's used for tables, but occasionally changing areas as well or other functions. So if we wanted to add a new button, we can and choose our function. Now opening another panel is actually called chaining. So you're not going to see open panel as a function in here. We would just go ahead and go up and choose chain, and then it says, okay, with this action, what panel do you want to display? And then we can go up and see the list of our other panels. So if I wanted another button in the middle to show me where the outside patio was, I can go ahead and include it. It's going to open my outside patio. I still need to name it, so this button's going to take us to the patio. I can change the name up at the top, and then maybe that patio entrance is down here. So we're going to stick it down there, and that's a place where they can go to the patio. We have the ability to change this displays of these buttons to make them blend in with the areas around them. There's quite a few options there. Right now it's set to the default of what our skin is doing, but if I go up here under font where it says panel button, we can choose to make that some other thing. So I'm going to set that to custom, and it's going to go ahead and let me choose the font that I want to work with. I can make it boldface if I need to. By clicking the little three dots there on the right side. And taking a sec. So it says, do you want to make it bold? Would you like to change the size of the font? Would you like it to be underlined? So we can make any changes that we need to, and you can see it got a little bit bolder there. We can also change the text color. So I've got it at dark blue, but if I wanted to make that really stand out, especially depending on the lighting in my restaurant, maybe I want to make it black. Maybe I want to change the background color of it, so we can change the background color as well. And one of the tricks that we can do is we can make our background color here and the background of a button the same color, and then that button just kind of vanishes. So if we did that, we would actually be able to label on the background of our scene. So I could take this button right here, and let's say over here this is always the same server takes care of this section, and I wanted to label it. I can put a button there. I can make sure that the background of my area is a certain color. So in this case I'm going to make the background here white. So this is white, my button is white. I'm going to make sure that the button that I'm placing there doesn't do anything. So instead of it chaining to this panel, we're just going to go ahead and set this to none. And if we set that to none, it means the button isn't doing anything now. And right now you wouldn't even see the button, but we could go ahead and label that as section 1. And now there's just going to appear that there's a label stuck in the background in the middle of that section. So now you can collectively refer to that with your staff as, hey, you know, this waiter has section 1, this waitress has section 2. And if you needed to, you could also use these lines to designate where that is. So we could let the staff visually know that section 1 goes from this table down to this table with those lines. Now be careful if you're using those lines to designate sections that you don't also use them as walls then. So maybe we want to make the line actually gray instead of black or something like that to give a false impression for new hires that there's a wall there that isn't. But there are different ways like that we can change it. So then besides that, there's some basic things we can do here with the buttons and the functions. So for instance, over in this panel, we can go ahead and add another button here too. Your staff is probably aware that in order to enter tips, they can go to the Working with Tables screen and they can go down and press the tips button at the bottom. Maybe we want to go ahead and insert a button right here on the main screen to remind them to enter their tips as they're going through the evening. So if we wanted to do that, I can either take all these and I can try to line them up and make space for me to put that button there. Or, since I'm probably not going to be very good at doing that, it's going to give me another option. I can select all the buttons that are here, and we can convert these into a grid. Oops. So if I select them again, and then we right select one of them, we now have an option that says convert to grid. So what it does is it creates a standard grid there, and it places all of them in it. You can see that I have 8 buttons, but it went ahead and in the space I had a lot, and it created 9 rows. And what I want to do is I'm just going to go ahead and change that to say, hey, I'm also needing 9 buttons. Okay, so it created an extra space here at the bottom for me to put that 9th button. I can take an additional one that's here. I'm going to copy that button, paste it. If I drag these and stick them somewhere, it will push everything else around to make space for it, so I can choose where I want it to be. I'm going to give that a different indicator just to make it easier to see that it's a new button or it's a different color or stand out. So for tips, I guess we'll make it green for my staff. And then what action do I want that button to do? And in this case, we're going to go ahead here and look at the list, and we have one for adjust tips. And so then that'll go ahead, and when the servers press that button, it'll just take them directly into entering their tips. So there's a couple different shortcuts we can do, or if we want to rearrange these, maybe we want to go ahead and take one of these buttons out. You don't want to take the takeout button out if you are using takeout and delivery, because if you remove that takeout button, then there's no way to get to it. There's not one in the interface underneath. We can also rename these, so if we needed to change the name of it to make it easier to read, or just to abbreviate it, we could take the word adjust out of there. You can also put in here it's a slash in the N. If you put that in there in between it, that tells it you want to start a new line. So there you go for adjust tips. And you can see we've used that up here in place of a space to make sure that those appear on separate lines. Okay. So doing that's going to let us make those changes on it. You always remember before you finish, make sure that you save all the panels that you're working on. Okay. We can also, much like I created here, creating a grid out of these. Sometimes we'll want to put tables in a grid. Probably unlikely, but if you happen to be working with custom panels, as we sometimes do for bars, for drinks, you would use the custom panel editor to do that as well, to change the dimensions of it. So if you needed to go here and add to that, to add a row of buttons, you have to make sure you're choosing the actual grid when you make sure it changes to it. So in this case, you can see I'm having difficulty getting the grid. So I clicked on the very edge, I was able to actually pick up the grid, and now I could change that to 10 rows or 10 buttons or 2 columns if I needed to add a whole nother one. Now if you try to change it to a significantly large number, remember that it's still just not going to let me make anything smaller than you can normally put your finger to touch that target. So I would actually need to maybe change the size of these panels. And if I change the size of this panel, then I have to change the size of this panel smaller, this one smaller, this one bigger. So we can choose that. And if you need to choose the actual panel properties to do that, or you want to choose the panel in general, under View, you actually have your open panels, and that will choose the whole thing. So if I'm here, I want to make a change, and I'm having difficulty getting the edge of this, so I can do it. I can click up here and just choose this, and it changes the properties to the entire panel behind it, and then I can make some changes. So I could change the size of this one by making it 50 bigger, and I could go over here and change this one by making it 50 smaller, and then they would all fit on the same screen. Pardon. Additionally to that, moving your tables around in panels, we can copy this and create a different panel. So if you have a different format on Sunday, for instance, sometimes you'll rearrange to put like a brunch buffet in the middle of the dining room, and you move all of your tables. We could actually change the table view for that. We can copy this panel. So if we duplicate this panel, now we have a new one. It's a copy of main dining. And we could call this Sunday dining. So now we can make changes to how our table arrangement is on Sundays. And then we can go ahead and reference that in system events to have the panel display a different menu on a different day of the week. If you need help with doing system events, though, we actually ask that you give us a call and have us help you with the system events, because the system events are a little bit more involved, but you could go ahead and draw out the menu, the floor plan, say this is the way I want my table arrangement to look on a different day. Can you guys have that panel take effect on that day? And we'd be happy to help you with that and even show you how to do it. It's just something that isn't fun to jump into without having somebody giving you a helping hand looking at how it is. So doing that, we can go ahead and change them. If we wanted to add where our actual individual buffet was going to be, I could go ahead and put down here that I want to put a new button in the background. And maybe I'm going to sketch out my buffet. Right. If we needed to label that, we could actually put the word buffet in there. And now it just gives our staff a different point of reference on that day. Oftentimes you can too with this, where I said I was making transparent buttons like this one. Sometimes it's good for you to go ahead and create options that are indicators where things are. You can use the different symbols on there to make an arrow, and we could say that that way is the kitchen. So that would be a good point of reference for our staff. Of course, we need to make the button a little bit bigger so that they can see it. Okay, so we could put some indicators on there to give them a frame of reference. You could draw your host stand for a podium, something to indicate as well. The buttons are always going to be white. We don't get to change the color on those, and that's just for visibility in the front of the house. We want to make sure that your staff is always able to see where the tables are and not create an invisible table that blends into the background that may confuse things because it overlaps with other buttons. So we could go ahead and create labels here for stuff. I actually do like to create labels in the background on things for a point of reference, whether it be indicating where doors are, the host stand, indicators for other areas of the restaurant. It's very helpful for new employees. You can also, and now remember this will be slightly different if I were using the alternate table names, so these are like H1, H2, H3. They wouldn't be reflected, but if you needed to, you can actually take a screenshot of this map, and then you could go ahead and print it out, and you could use that for trainers and training your staff as well. Sometimes that's a little bit easier because you know it reflects exactly what the staff is seeing, and you can put that underneath the host stand for them to write on if it was laminated, or if you needed to use it as a reference sheet for training purposes for memorizing table numbers. That would be helpful as well. Otherwise, when we are making these panel transitions here, the new table, the new wall, the new button are the basic ones that you would use. We can move these around, drag them, resize them by holding down Control. Of course, we can choose multiple ones and then resize from there. Moves everything with us as we're doing it. So that means so that you don't have to make individual changes over and over and over again for the same tables, or I could just make one change on the other one, and then I can select multiples and go ahead and say that I want them all to be the same size. Just make sure that you remember which one is using the reference point. So that's kind of the basics for making the floor plan changes and moving things around. There's some additional options you'll see when you're actually in the table things here, but most of these are just for turning on, like whether we want to see the panel name on it, whether we want to see a border here or an edge, and usually you won't make any changes to those. Those other options are here, whether the things are going to have shadows and stuff such. You'll probably leave just the way they are for consistency across all of your panels. You wouldn't really want to make any changes to those. If you're working on something in progress and you want to save it, you can go ahead and create that copy of it, make the changes to it, and save it. And it doesn't mean it's going to show up out front until we actually put a button in to link to it. So I made that panel that was the copy of it, the Sunday panel. I'm going to tell it to save all panels. I've got overlapping elements, so it's going to give me a big error here. We'll save all panels. And then if I needed to create a button for that Sunday dining, instead of having it just trigger on Sunday, I want it to always be available. I could go ahead and move these over, and we can create a fourth one in here. We'll go ahead and paste that button in. Now we've got 4 buttons here, so we're going to go ahead and choose those 4 buttons. We're going to line them up on the bottom. I'm going to space them evenly. I can't tell if those fit or not. We're going to spread them out just a little bit more so we know that they're not on top of each other. Space them evenly horizontally. We'll line them to the bottom so they look nice. And then this fourth one over here, instead of having it, we're going to tell it what panel we want it to go to. This one's going to the outside patio, this one's going to the bar, and instead of the outside patio on this one, we could choose what other panel it was that we want it to go to. So the Sunday dining, I'm going to go ahead and hit this arrow to include it. You can see that's what it will bring up when I choose it. Okay, and then we just need to make sure we rename that button. So now my staff would see a different layout if they click that Sunday button. Useful when you're testing or if you're adding a new area, if you're expanding on. A lot of times people will add and remove a button there on the panel for summer outdoor seating. If you have a patio area that's open and closed, you can remove it during the winter so your staff isn't ringing things out there or leaving open tables or using it to put employee meals out there, something where you're not normally checking for it, and then you can return that area when you open it. It's kind of a common one that people will call and ask us to go ahead and add summer patios or summer seatings, and often those change from year to year. So you want to make sure that you have a way on here that you know how to add tables, remove them, change the table numbers as it changes with your season and your outdoor furniture. So that's the basics of adding and making some adjustments in here. It's kind of straightforward. If you've ever used a Microsoft, like a photo editor or anything to make adjustments, for a drawing tool in Microsoft and Windows, the drawing tool is very basic and the same functionality as this, so it feels pretty comfortable if you've ever done any of that. If you haven't, you just kind of go slow. And take a look at what you're seeing, the information. Mostly it's just taking existing information and moving it around or copying something. The difference is that when you copy an item, a table number, and you place a new table, right, we can go ahead and do that. And it's even going to let us save that panel. So if I went ahead and clicked this one, though, both of them would become occupied because the system knows that table 302 has stuff rang in. So you just got to make sure that when you do create those new tables, make sure that you assign them individual table numbers, move it off to a new table number instead of reusing the same one multiple times. If you copy one by hitting the keyboard shortcuts like Control Copy and then I want to paste, it's always going to put them in the center, but it offsets, so you can go ahead and create your table numbers that way, and then we can drag them off and place them wherever we need to. Sometimes, especially if I'm doing a new area, I might just go ahead and select an entire range of the panel on here and drag everything out and then delete, so I can create that entire table and then start putting new ones in there from scratch. You'll notice when I select multiple tables, whether that be by hitting Control or whether it's by me selecting and dragging, it's not going to let me make changes over here to anything that affects an individual table. So you'll notice choosing the table number has changed because it's not going to let me, they should have each unique, but I could change the style for all of them or the orientation for all of them at one time by selecting multiple. So if I do that, right, we can change multiple that way. However, when you go ahead and select something that is not a table, so here I selected the wall, and it looks like I'm just trying to select the three tables, but remember the wall is a giant button behind it. If I do select something else like the wall or a button, it's not going to let me edit because now I've got multiple types of things and it doesn't know how to apply and edit to different things that are completely unrelated. So if you want to do that, just make sure instead of dragging a box and select, just make sure you hit Control and click on the individual elements that you want to change. And that works with your things in the background too. I could change that wall and this wall at the same time by hitting Control and just selecting the two walls. Usually where people are going to have a difficulty is because they've got some things overlapping in an area that is very crowded. If you have a lot of things taking place in that area and you do a lot of overlapping elements, you need to make sure that you have enough of a space between them. There's a little bit of a border around there, so like this one right here, for instance, you can see it's still a square box. So if I set 407 up close to that, they overlap, even though you can't tell it when you're looking at 407. So spreading things out a little bit just to create that gap between them is not just helpful for the system, but it's helpful for your staff. Even if you need to zoom in and create a floor plan or a panel here that is a much bigger area than what you were thinking you were going to fit your whole restaurant in a panel. If you start to get too crowded, you want to break that up into two different panels or have them on separate screens for ease of use for your staff too. And that's kind of the basics of moving things around. It's not a very complicated subject. Like I said, you can see that there's a lot of different functions you can add buttons to if you would like. And those activities that we put in here for choices on the buttons, we can add one for adjusting their payments and their tips. Those are very common ones. Most of the other stuff in here will be maybe buttons for checking balances. If you're using gift cards, integrated gift cards, and you want a button to check the balance and go ahead and just swipe it so you know how much is remaining on that. You can also have one in here to run the server's checkouts if they've got it, or to do clock out. Those are a little less common because this space is usually reserved for trying to do table management specifically. The attach and detach tables buttons like we have here. Get check is sometimes used if your establishment is one where sometimes people come up to the bar to pay instead of paying the servers. You could look at them directly. If you are using bartenders, want to use the floor plan, you might want to use new tab as a shortcut out here so that they don't have to choose a table. If somebody comes up and is just standing there and wants to do a tab, there's an easy way to get to it. Those are the biggest ones that are going to be most commonly used. Everything else that's in here is some special functions that we use when we enable things. But if you're missing any of these buttons, or you want to add them, or if you want to add them in a different spot, now you know how to go ahead and move the buttons around and make some changes to the screen. Hopefully keep your tables up to date, your floor plan. It makes it a lot easier on your staff as well as on your customers. Just for speed of service reasons, your staff doesn't have to try to remember the tables. They can come right up, tap on them, and proceed with what they're doing. And also so that you have some uniformity and consistency in both your operations and your training. If you get into anything interesting in here and you need a little help, you're more than welcome to give us a call, or you can email us at support@integratedpos.com, and we'd be happy to help you and walk you through with it. The main support number is, of course, 877-442-4767, and that shows here at the end. And that's it. I thank you for your time. If you need any additional help, let us know.